Médéric Rampal, the postman whom the locals simply called Médéric, left the Roy-le-Tour post office at his usual hour. Striding with the long, purposeful steps of a former soldier, he crossed the town, cut straight through the Vila meadows, reached the banks of the Brendel, and turned downstream, towards the village of Carvelin, where his route began. He walked briskly along the narrow, grass-grown bank of the swift, turbulent stream, which gurgled merrily under the overhanging branches of the willows. Where the current met boulders, the water swelled, forming foamy collars around them, adorned with butterflies. In such spots, tiny waterfalls sometimes cascaded, noisy, grumbling, yet not at all malevolent, rumbling under the green roof of foliage. Further on, the banks drew apart, revealing quiet pools where trout darted in the depths, among the tangled, matted weeds that coated the beds of the sluggish backwaters. Médéric walked on, undistracted, absorbed in his thoughts. First to the poivrons. There's a letter for Monsieur Renardet, too. So the way lies through the wood. In his blue smock, fastened with a black leather belt, he moved swiftly and surely along the line of green willows, swinging his stick, a thick holly branch, in time with his steps. He crossed the Brendel by means of a tree trunk, which had fallen so that its crown rested on the opposite bank. A taut rope, fixed to two stakes driven into the ground, served as a handrail. The wood of Renardet, the mayor of Carvelin and the largest landowner in those parts, stretched along the left bank of the stream. It was filled with mighty trees, straight as columns, their green vaults extending for nearly half a mile. Near the water, in the sun, a tall thicket grew wild, but beneath the trees there was only moss, thick, lush, soft, exuding a scent of decay and deadwood in the motionless air. Médéric slowed his pace, took off his black cap with its red braid, and wiped his brow. Though it was not yet 8 in the morning, the sun was already beating down. Having put his cap back on, he quickened his step again, when suddenly he spotted a small child's knife under a tree. Bending down, he found a thimble nearby, and a little further on, a pincushion. Having picked up the finds, Rampal thought, "I'll take these to the mayor," and set off again, now walking more attentively, so as not to miss anything important. Suddenly he recoiled sharply, as if he had run into a barrier. Just a few paces away, on the moss, lay the naked body of a child. It was a girl of about 12. She lay on her back, her arms and legs flung wide. Her face was covered with a handkerchief, and on her thighs were stains of dried blood. His eyes wide with shock, Médéric cautiously approached on tiptoe, as if afraid of something. What was this? Was she asleep? But he realized at once. No one would sleep naked in the damp wood at 7:30 in the morning. So she was dead. A crime. A shiver ran down his spine, despite his soldier's fortitude. He couldn't believe his eyes. Murder, and of a child, such things were exceedingly rare in their parts. There were no visible wounds, only the blood on her legs. How had she been killed? Médéric moved closer, leaned on his stick, and stared at the girl. Of course, he knew everyone in the district, but without a face it was hard to tell who she was. He had already bent down to push the handkerchief aside when a sudden thought stopped him. Did he have the right to touch the body before the authorities arrived? Justice, to him, was like a general from whom not a button nor a scratch would escape. What if the clue lay beneath the handkerchief? Material evidence could be rendered useless by a careless touch. He straightened up, intending to run to the mayor, but then another thought stopped him. If the girl were alive, she must not be left alone. He carefully knelt at a distance and touched her foot. It was cold as ice, that very chill which leaves no room for doubt. He later said that at that moment his very insides seemed to turn over, and his mouth went dry. He sprang to his feet and dashed through the wood towards Renardet's house. He ran as if on drill maneuvers, head lowered, fists clenched, his stick under his arm, his bag of letters and newspapers beating a rhythmic tattoo against his side. The mayor's house stood at the edge of the wood, which served as its park, and one of its corners overlooked a pool formed there by the Brendel. It was a large, ancient building of gray stone that had survived more than one siege, with a massive, square tower 20 meters high, the base of which plunged directly into the water. From the summit of this fortification, sentinels had once kept watch over the surrounding lands. Why it had been named Renard's Tower, after Renard the Fox, was not known for certain. It was likely from this very nickname that the owners of the estate, which had been in their family for over 2 centuries, had taken their surname. The Renardets were of that breed of bourgeois semi-nobility so abundant in the pre-revolutionary provinces. The postman burst into the kitchen, where the servants were breakfasting at the table, and asked loudly, "Is the mayor up? I need to see him urgently." Rumpel was known as a steady, reliable man, and so everyone understood at once that something serious had happened. The mayor was informed and gave orders for the visitor to be shown in. The postman, pale and out of breath, found Renardet at a long table littered with papers. He was a large, stout man with a ruddy face and the strength of a bull, who commanded respect in the district despite his rough temper. He was about 40 years old, had been widowed 6 months prior, and lived the life of a country squire. Extremely hot-headed, he had repeatedly landed himself in unpleasant scrapes, from which he was invariably extricated by his devoted friends, the officials at Roy-le-Tour. It was he who had dragged a stagecoach driver from his box for nearly running over his setter, Micmac. It was he who had thrashed a rural constable for riding him up when the mayor was found with a gun on someone else's land. And it was he who had once seized a sub-prefect by the scruff of the neck, mistaking an official visit for electioneering. For, true to family tradition, Renardet was in opposition to the government. The mayor looked up. "What is it, Médéric? I found a little girl dead in your wood." Renardet sprang to his feet, his face turning the color of brick. "What did you say? A little girl?" "Yes, sir. Lying on her back, naked, covered in blood, and dead. Stone dead." "Good God," swore the mayor. "I'll wager it's Little Roque. They told me she didn't come home last night. Where did you find her?" The postman described the spot, recounted everything he had seen, and offered to escort the mayor there. But Renardet cut him short. "No, I don't need you. Go immediately and fetch the rural constable, the town clerk, and the doctor. And you, get on with your mail route. Look sharp now. Tell them to wait for me in the wood." Rumpel, a disciplined official, obeyed and left, chagrined that he would miss the examination of the scene. The mayor followed him, took a wide-brimmed hat of soft gray felt from the hall, and paused for a moment at the door. Before him stretched a spacious lawn, punctuated by 3 splashes of vibrant color, red, blue, and white, lush flower beds, one in front of the house and 2 on either side. Beyond them rose the first trees of the wood, and to the left, on the opposite bank of the Brendel, which widened here to the size of a pond, stretched endless meadows, flat and green, checkered with ditches and rows of pollard willows. Their trembling plumes of branches atop short, stumpy trunks gave them the look of ugly, squat dwarfs. To the right, beyond the stables, barns, and other outbuildings of the estate began the village, populated by well-to-do livestock farmers. Once beneath the canopy of the trees, he stopped, removed his hat, and, just as Mederic had done earlier, wiped the sweat from his brow. The July sun was pouring a veritable deluge of fire upon the earth. The mayor took a few steps, halted again, then turned back. Suddenly, he bent down, scooped up water from the stream lapping at his feet, soaked his handkerchief, and draped it over his head under his hat. Cold rivulets streamed down his temples, over his perpetually ruddy ears, down his powerful, blood-congested neck, and droplets, one after another, trickled behind the collar of his spotless white shirt. No one appeared, and the mayor, stamping his foot impatiently, shouted, "Halloo-oh-oh!" An answer came from the right. "Halloo-oh-oh!" The doctor emerged from behind the trees. A small, lean man, a former army surgeon, he was considered a capable and reliable physician in the district. He had been wounded in service and now walked with a limp, supporting himself with a cane. Close behind him came the rural constable and the town clerk. They had been summoned simultaneously and had arrived together. Both men looked alarmed and were short of breath. To get there faster, they had alternated between running and walking, swinging their arms so vigorously that it seemed they were propelling themselves more with them than with their legs. Renardet addressed the doctor. "You are aware of what has happened?" "Yes." "Mederic came across a dead child in the wood." "Quite right. Let's go." They walked side by side, the other two following. Their steps on the moss were soundless, their gazes fixed ahead. Suddenly, Dr. Labarre pointed. Over there, in the distance, something pale flickered between the trees. Had they not known what to look for, they would never have guessed. The spot seemed dazzlingly white, as if someone had thrown laundry on the ground. A sunbeam, piercing the foliage, lay in a broad diagonal stripe across the belly of the lifeless body. The closer they got, the clearer the figure became, lying with its head towards the bank, its face covered by a handkerchief, and its arms flung out as if in crucifixion. "The heat is unbearable," muttered the mayor. He bent to the water again, soaked his handkerchief, and pressed it to his forehead. The doctor, his professional interest now awakened, quickened his pace. Reaching the body, he bent over and began his examination, careful not to touch anything. Then he fixed his pince-nez and slowly, as if studying a specimen, walked all around it. Without straightening up, he declared, "Rape and murder. That's what we'll certify." The girl, however, is almost a woman. Observe the breasts. The breasts of the deceased, which had already developed, were sagging in death. Labarbe lifted the handkerchief covering the face. It was blackened, horrifying. The tongue protruded, the eyes were bulging. The doctor continued, "Good God, she was assaulted and then strangled." He felt the neck, strangled by hand, but there are no marks, no scratches, no prints. "There you have it. Yes, it's definitely Little Roque." He carefully replaced the handkerchief. "There's nothing more for me to do here. Death occurred no less than 12 hours ago. The public prosecutor must be notified immediately." Renardet, his hands clasped behind his back, kept his eyes fixed on the outstretched body. He muttered, "What a monster! We must find her clothes." The doctor felt the hands, shoulders, and legs, and added, "It seems she had been bathing beforehand. Her things must be somewhere on the bank." The mayor gave orders. "Principali," he said, addressing the clerk, "walk along the stream, look for her clothes. And you, Maxime," he said to the constable, "get to Roy-le-Tour, fetch the investigating magistrate and the police." I want them here within the hour, understood? Both assistants vanished as if swept away by the wind, and Renardet, frowning, turned to the doctor. Who in God's name could have done such a thing in our parts? Labarbe replied quietly, almost pensively. Anyone. Everyone is capable of it, and no one in particular. Though, most likely, it was some vagrant or an unemployed laborer. There are plenty of them about these days. It is a republic, after all. Both men were staunch Bonapartists. The mayor nodded. Of course, it must have been an outsider, a chance passerby, without a roof, without bread, and without a woman, added the doctor with a wry smirk. Denied supper and a bed, so he rewarded himself as best he could. God alone knows how many men are capable of such a thing at a given moment. Did you know the girl was missing? As if playing an instrument, he pressed the tip of his cane one by one on the stiffened fingers of the deceased, like piano keys. Yes, I knew. The mother came to me yesterday, around 9 in the evening, complaining her daughter hadn't come home for supper at 7. We searched for her until midnight, scoured all the roads, called, shouted, but it didn't occur to us to look in the wood. And it was wiser to wait for morning. You can't see anything at night anyway. A cigar? Offer the doctor. No. Thank you, I don't feel like one. This old business turns my stomach. They stood over the fragile body of the child, pale, almost translucent against the dark moss. A large fly with a bluish abdomen crawled along the thigh, paused at the bloodstains, then climbed the side, traversed one breast, descended, and investigated the other, searching for something to eat. The men silently watched its busy movement. The doctor remarked, "Remarkable, a fly on the skin. There's something aesthetic about it. No wonder ladies in the last century wore beauty patches. I wonder why that went out of fashion." The mayor, lost in his thoughts, seemed not to hear. Suddenly he started, catching a noise. A woman in a cap and a blue apron was running between the trees. It was Mother Roque, the girl's mother. Seeing Renardet, she lost all reason. Though she hadn't yet seen the body, she screamed, "My little one! Where is my little one?" Suddenly spotting the corpse, she froze, clasped her hands, threw them above her head, and let out a piercing, animalistic shriek, like a wounded beast. She rushed to the body, fell to her knees, and snatched the handkerchief covering her daughter's face. Seeing the blackened, distorted features, she recoiled, straightened up, fell again, and with a long, wild howl, buried her face in the moss. Her long, emaciated body shuddered beneath her taut dress, and one could see the convulsions seizing her bony ankles and thin calves in coarse blue stockings. With crooked fingers, she clawed at the earth as if she wanted to dig herself a burrow and disappear into it. The doctor, shaken, whispered, "Poor woman." A strange sound erupted from Renardet's stomach. He made a peculiar noise, as if sneezing through his nose and mouth at once, pulled out his handkerchief, buried his face in it, sobbed, broke into tears, coughing, sniffing, and muttering, damn him, the scoundrel. I'd send him to the guillotine myself." Meanwhile, Principale returned, crestfallen, empty-handed. He muttered, "Found nothing, Monsieur le Maire. Nothing anywhere." Renardet, still distraught, asked in a hoarse voice, "Found nothing of what?" "The girl's things." "Well, then look again, and you'll find them. Or else watch out." The clerk cowed, threw an anxious glance at the body, and hurried away. He knew better than to argue with the mayor. In the distance, under the trees, a murmur could now be heard, the discordant voices of an approaching crowd. Maupassant, on his rounds, had carried the news from house to house. People were first bewildered, then began talking across the street from their doorsteps, gathered, discussed, argued, and soon set off for the scene. Have to see what happened there. They approached in groups, wary, afraid of what they might see. At the sight of the body, those in front halted, not daring to come closer, whispering amongst themselves. Then, plucking up courage, they took a few steps, stopped, moved again, and, excited, formed a tight ring around the deceased, her mother, the doctor, and the mayor, a ring that kept tightening under the pressure of newcomers. Soon they were pressing right up against the body. Some even bent down and touched it. The doctor pushed the curious back. But then Renardet, as if snapping awake, grabbed Labarb's cane and with a shout, "Get back, you brutes! Get back!" he charged at the gawkers. In an instant, the crowd parted, and the line of onlookers stretched back a good 200 meters. Mother Roque slowly rose, turned, sat down on the ground, covered her face with her hands, and began to weep again. The crowd buzzed, discussing the event. Young lads stared with greedy curiosity at the girl's naked body. Renardet noticed this, abruptly took off his linen jacket, and covered the child with it. The girl vanished beneath the broad garment, as if under a shroud. The onlookers pressed forward again, their numbers growing, and beneath the dense foliage of the tall trees, the incessant hum of voices continued. The mayor, jacketless, with a cane in his hand, stood ready to charge into the throng. Visibly irritated by the crowd's persistence, he repeated, "The first one who dares to come closer, I'll smash his head in like a mad dog's." The peasants kept their distance. They were afraid of Renardet. Labarbe, his cigar still in his mouth, sat down beside Mother Roque, trying to distract her from her grief. The old woman took her hands from her face and answered with lamentations, pouring out her soul in long, plaintive phrases. She told the doctor her whole life, how she had married, how a bull had gored her drover husband, how Louise had grown up, how hard it had been for a widow with a child. She had no one left, only this little girl, and now she had been killed here in the wood. She wanted to look at her daughter one more time. On her knees, she crawled to the body, lifted the edge of the jacket covering the girl, then let it fall and began to sob again. The crowd watched her every move silently with rapt attention. Suddenly, the people started, drew back, and a clamor arose. The police! The police! In the distance, 2 mounted gendarmes appeared, trotting at a brisk pace. They were escorting their captain and a civilian official, a short man with reddish side whiskers, who bounced on a tall white mare like a monkey. The rural constable had found the investigating magistrate just as he was about to set out for his daily ride. To the great amusement of the officers, Putois considered himself a skilled horseman. He dismounted with the captain, shook hands with the mayor and the doctor, and cast a scrutinizing look at the jacket tinted over the body. After hearing the circumstances of the case, his first order was to clear the area of onlookers. The police drove the crowd out of the wood, but soon the people gathered again in the meadow on the other side of the Brendel, forming a living hedge of agitated figures. The doctor presented his observations, and Renardet noted them down in a notebook. Every detail was examined, recorded, discussed, but it yielded no results. Principali returned empty-handed as well. The girl's clothing had vanished without trace. This disappearance baffled everyone. One could suppose theft, but even that theory seemed doubtful. The rags weren't worth a penny. The magistrate, the mayor, the captain, and the doctor themselves began the search. Splitting into pairs, they combed every bush along the bank, even the most inconspicuous ones. Renardet asked the magistrate, "What does it mean? The bastard took the clothes and left the body in plain sight." The magistrate, with a mysterious air, replied, "Eh, and what if it's a ruse? The crime was committed either by a beast or a consummate scoundrel. In any case, we will find him." The sound of wheels was heard, and everyone turned. The deputy prosecutor, the medical examiner, and the clerk of the court had arrived. The search resumed, and the conversation grew more animated. Unexpectedly, Renardet announced, "Gentlemen, you must know I cannot let you go without breakfast." Everyone smiled and readily accepted the invitation. The magistrate, deciding that the work here was done for the day, addressed the mayor. "May I give orders for the body to be taken to your house until this evening? You must have a spare room." The mayor hesitated, stammering, "Well, no. Frankly, it will be better not to. The servants, they're already gossiping about ghosts in Renard's tower. They'd all run off. No, I prefer not to have the body brought to my house." The magistrate smirked. "Very well, then. I shall order it sent immediately to Roy-le-Tour for the post-mortem." He turned to the deputy prosecutor. "May I use your carriage?" "Yes, of course." They all gathered again by the body. Mother Roque was sitting beside her daughter, clutching her hand, staring into emptiness with a dull, vacant gaze. The two doctors tried to lead her away. She shouldn't see her child being taken. But she instantly understood their intention, threw herself upon the body, embraced it, and, lying across it, howled, "I won't give her up. She's mine, she's still mine. They killed her, but at least leave me her body. I won't give her up." The men shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Renardet knelt down beside her and began to reason with her. "Listen, Mother Roque, this is necessary. Without it, we cannot find out who is guilty, and we must find the murderer and punish him. Once we catch him, we will return the girl to you, I promise." These words had an effect. The woman wavered, and a spark of fury ignited in her tormented eyes. "So you will catch him?" she asked. "I swear it to you." She was almost resigned, but then the captain incautiously remarked, "It's strange, though, that the clothing hasn't been found." And a thought, which had not previously occurred to her peasant mind, flashed within it. She demanded, "And where are her clothes?" "They are mine. Give them back." "What have you done with them?" They tried to explain that the items had vanished, but driven by despair, she would not yield and kept repeating, "They are mine. Give them back." "Where are they?" "Give them to me." The more they tried to persuade her, the louder and more stubbornly she sobbed. Her demand likely sprang not only from a mother's feeling, but also from that unconscious avarice which lives in a poor person, for whom even an old cap is a treasure. Now she wasn't asking for the body back. She wanted the clothes, her clothes. As the body, wrapped in blankets brought from Renardet's house, was placed in the carriage, Mother Roque, standing between the mayor and the captain who supported her, wailed, "I have nothing left of her. Nothing at all. Not even her little cap. Nothing, absolutely nothing." The parish priest appeared, a young man, but already portly. He offered to accompany the dead girl's mother home, and the two of them set off towards the village. The priest's honeyed words, promising her heavenly comfort, softened her grief a little, but she kept repeating, "If only I had her cap." This thought seemed to have driven all others from her mind. Renardet called after her, "Come for breakfast, Monsieur le Curé." "In an hour." The priest turned and replied, "With pleasure, Monsieur le Maire. I shall be with you at noon." Everyone headed towards the house, whose gray silhouette with the tall tower on the bank of the Brindle was visible through the foliage. The breakfast was a long one, and the conversation revolved around the crime. All were in agreement. The atrocity had been committed by some chance vagrant, passing by while the girl was bathing. After the meal, the officials departed for Roye, promising to return early the next morning. The doctor and the priest went their separate ways, and Renardet wandered for a long time in the meadows, then went into the wood and walked there slowly, his hands behind his back, until nightfall. He went to bed early and was still asleep when the investigating magistrate entered his room the next morning, rubbing his hands with a satisfied air. "Still asleep? Well, we have news, my dear fellow." The mayor sat up in bed. "What news?" "Most peculiar. You remember how the mother yesterday begged for something to remember her by, especially the little cap? Well, this morning she opens her door and finds her daughter's sabots on the doorstep. This means the criminal is local. He evidently felt sorry for the old woman. Furthermore, Médéric brought me the girl's thimble, pincushion, and knife. They undoubtedly fell from the pocket when the murderer was carrying off the clothes. But for me, the main clue is the business with the shoes. It shows the criminal is capable of compassion. Let us review the most notable local inhabitants. The mayor got up, rang for hot water to be brought for shaving, and replied, "By all means, but it will take time, so let us begin without delay." Putois straddled a chair as if it were a saddle. Even indoors, he couldn't shake his obsessive habit of playing the horseman. Renardet positioned himself before the mirror, soaped his face, took the strop, drew the razor taut, and began. "The most notable inhabitant of Carvelin is Joseph Renardet, mayor, large landowner, and brawler, known for thrashing constables and coachmen." The magistrate laughed. "Enough of that. Move on to the next. The second in importance is Peldon, my deputy, a cattle breeder, and also the owner of considerable land. A cunning, secretive peasant, sharp in money matters, but in my opinion, not the sort capable of such a thing." "Next," said Putois. As he shaved and washed, Renardet went through the moral portraits of all the inhabitants of Carvelin one by one. After 2 hours of discussion, suspicion fell upon 3 men: a poacher named Cable, a certain Piquet, who made a living catching trout and crayfish, and a cattle drover called Clovis. The investigation dragged on all summer, but the criminal was never found. All the suspects and those detained easily proved their innocence, and the prosecution was forced to drop the case. Yet the murder left a deep mark on the souls of the local people. A sense of unease settled over the district, a vague fear, an unreasoning terror, born not only from the lack of evidence, but above all, from the mysterious appearance of the sabots on Mother Roque's doorstep that night. The thought that the murderer had been present at the examination of the body, that he undoubtedly lived in Carvelin, took root in their minds, becoming an obsession, a shadow hanging over the village. The wood gained a reputation as a dangerous place. People began to avoid it, saying it was haunted. Previously, on Sundays after lunch, the peasants would hold their gatherings there. They would sit on the moss beneath the immense trees or stroll along the bank, watching for trout darting among the weeds. The lads played at bowls, skittles, ball, and quoits on cleared and trampled patches of ground, while the girls walked 4 or 5 abreast, holding hands, singing romances loudly and so off-key that the very air seemed to turn sour and one's teeth ached as if from vinegar. Now, no one ventured beneath that dense green vault anymore. People were afraid of stumbling upon another corpse. Autumn arrived, and the wood began to shed its leaves. Day and night, light oval leaves fell in spirals from the tall trees, and the sky began to show through the branches. Sometimes, when a gust of wind swept over the treetops, this continuous, slow leaf fall would suddenly intensify, rustling like rain and carpeting the moss with a thick yellow layer that crackled underfoot. The endless, flying, mournful, and almost soundless rustle was like a lament. The leaves, still falling, seemed like tears, great tears shed by the giant trees, mourning day and night the departing year, the cool dawns, the peaceful evenings, the warm wind and bright sun, or perhaps that terrible crime of which they had been witnesses, the death of the child, assaulted and strangled at their roots. They wept in the silence of the empty, deserted, fear-inspiring wood, where the lonely soul of the little victim seemed to linger. The Brindle, swollen by the rains, rushed swiftly between its banks, now covered with withered grass, between two rows of thin, naked willows. And then, suddenly, for no apparent reason, Renardet resumed his walks in the wood. Every day, towards evening, he would leave the house, slowly descend the steps, and, thrusting his hands into his pockets, plunge into its thinned-out shade. He would wander for a long time on the damp, sunken moss, while overhead, like a morning veil torn by the wind, clouds of crows wheeled with a deafening clamor. They gathered here from the surrounding area to roost for the night. From time to time, the birds would alight on bare branches, peppering the blood-red sky of the autumn twilight with black specks. Then, with harsh caws, they would soar back into the air, again tracing their zigzag flight over the wood. Finally, they would settle on the very highest treetops. Their clamor would die down, and their black plumage would merge with the advancing darkness of night. And Renardet kept walking, slowly, stubbornly, beneath the trees. Only when the twilight became impenetrable would he return home, collapse into his armchair by the fireplace as if struck down, and stretch his feet, shod in damp boots that steamed for a long time afterwards, toward the flames. One morning, news spread through the district. The mayor had decided to have his wood cut down. 24 woodcutters were already at work in the clearing. They had started with the section adjoining the house and were working diligently, under the personal supervision of the owner. The first to ascend a tree was the branch cutter. Tied with a rope, he would embrace the trunk with his arms, lift a leg, and forcefully drive a steel spike attached to his sole into the wood. The point bit into the bark, and the man, as if climbing an invisible ladder, shifted his weight to the other foot, driving in a second spike, and repeated the motion. With each step, he hitched up the rope loop that held him to the tree. A small steel axe gleamed on his back. Slowly, like a parasite on a giant's body, he climbed upward, hugging the colossal column, which he pierced with his spurs before beheading it. Upon reaching the first branches, he would stop, draw his tool, and begin to chop. He worked methodically, precisely, aiming his blows as close to the trunk as possible. Suddenly, a crack, the branch gave way, sagged, snapped, and crashed down, brushing against neighboring trees. It fell with a splintering sound, like a split log, its smaller twigs trembling for a long time afterwards. Branches lay everywhere. Other workers trimmed them, bound them into bundles, and stacked them in piles. And the trees not yet felled stood around like giant stakes, lopped, shaved, naked. Having finished the lopping, the branch cutter left the rope loop on the thin, straight top, and, driving his spikes in again, descended the bare trunk. Now the fellers took over, hacking at the base with heavy blows whose echoes resounded through the entire wood. When the gash was deep enough, 5 men, shouting in unison, began to pull on the rope attached to the top. A rending crack sounded, and the giant mast came crashing down, shaking the earth with a dull roar like a distant cannon shot. The wood grew thinner day by day, losing trees as an army loses soldiers. Renardet never left it. From morning till evening, his hands behind his back, he stood motionless, watching the slow death of his forest. When a tree fell, he would step on it as if it were a vanquished body. Then, with a secret, tense expectation, he would shift his gaze to the next one, as if hoping that after this slaughter, something would change. The woodcutters are now approaching the spot where Little Roque had been found. They reached it towards evening in the first shades of twilight. The sky was overcast, darkness was gathering, and the workers decided to stop for the day, postponing the felling of a huge beech tree until morning. But the mayor objected. He demanded that the giant, under whose shade the crime had occurred, be stripped and felled immediately. Once the branch cutter had bared the trunk, completing the final toilet of the condemned tree, the fellers hacked at its base, and 5 men seized the rope attached to its summit. The tree resisted. Its mighty trunk, though undercut to the heart, remained hard as iron. The workers, almost lying on the ground, pulled on the rope with a strained, guttural cry that helped them coordinate their effort. 2 woodcutters with axes stood by, like executioners ready to deal the final blow. And Renardet, motionless, his hand resting on the trunk, watched its fall with anxious, tense anticipation. One of the workers cautioned him. "You're too close, Monsieur le Maire. Be careful, it could crush you." Renardet didn't answer and didn't retreat a step. At that moment, he resembled a wrestler poised to throw himself upon the beach, grapple it, and hurl it down. Suddenly, a splintering sound came from the base of the tall wooden column, and a shudder seemed to run up the trunk all the way to its summit. The tree tilted, ready to fall, but still held. The excited woodcutters strained, pulling harder, and at the very second the beech finally yielded and began its fall, Renardet unexpectedly stepped forward, drew his head into his shoulders, and stood frozen, as if awaiting the crushing blow that was meant to smash him. But the tree passed just to the side, merely brushing the mayor's back. He was thrown several meters and landed face down. The workers rushed to him, but he was already pushing himself up onto his knees, dazed, with a bewildered gaze, and passed a hand over his face, as if coming to his senses after a fit of madness. When he stood up, the woodcutters, stunned by what had happened, surrounded him with questions. They couldn't understand what had come over him. The mayor, haltingly, explained that it had been a moment of confusion, an eclipse of reason. More precisely, he had momentarily reverted to childhood. It had seemed to him that he could dart under the falling tree, just as boys run across the road in front of a galloping carriage. He had been playing with danger, drawn to it irresistibly all week. Each time he heard the crack of a falling tree, he had asked himself if he could dive under the trunk and remain unharmed. Stupid, of course, but everyone has such moments of bewilderment, of childish impulse. Renardet spoke slowly, in a hollow voice, choosing his words with caution. Then he bid them farewell. "Until tomorrow, my friends. Until tomorrow." Returning home, he sat down at the table, illuminated by a lamp with a shade, pressed his temples with his palms, and began to shake with sobs. He wept for a long time. Then he wiped his eyes, raised his head, and glanced at the clock. It was just after 5:30. He thought, I must do it before dinner. He stood up, locked the door with a key, sat down again, opened the middle drawer, took out a revolver, and placed down the papers right under the light. The steel gleamed, throwing fiery reflections. For a minute, Renardet looked at the weapon with a dull, dazed expression, like a drunkard's. Then he rose and began to pace the room. He walked from corner to corner, sometimes stopping, then moving again. Suddenly, he flung open the door to the washroom, wet a towel in the water jug, and, just as on that morning when the girl was found, pressed it to his forehead. Then he resumed his pacing. Each time he passed the table, his gaze snagged on the revolver. It seemed to beg for his hand. But Renardet kept looking at the clock and reassured himself. Not yet. It struck 5:30. With a contorted face, he snatched the revolver, gaped his mouth, and thrust the barrel inside as if he meant to swallow it. For several seconds, he stood motionless, his finger on the trigger. Then he shuddered, seized with horror, hurled the weapon onto the carpet, collapsed into an armchair, and burst into tears. I can't. I'm afraid. My God, where can I find the strength? How can I bring myself to do it? A knock came at the door. Renardet, losing his composure, jumped up. A servant's voice sounded from the other side. Dinner is served, sir, announced the servant. The mayor replied, Very well, I'm coming down. He carefully put the revolver back in the desk drawer, glanced in the mirror over the fireplace to see if his face was too discomposed. It was flushed a little more than usual, but nothing more. Going down to the dining room, he took his place at the table. He ate slowly, as if afraid of being left alone with himself again. While the servants cleared the dishes, he smoked a couple of pipefuls. Then he returned to his room. No sooner had he locked the door than he looked under the bed, flung open the wardrobe doors, searched the corners, felt over the furniture. He lit the candles on the mantelpiece and scanned the bedroom several times. His eyes held a melancholy and a fear that distorted his features. He knew that tonight, once again, he would see her, Little Roque, the girl he had assaulted and strangled. Every night this cursed vision returned. First, a buzzing would start in his ears, like the sound of a threshing machine or the distant rumble of a train crossing a bridge. Renardet's breathing would grow labored. He would feel short of air, unfastening his collar and his belt. He would pace the room to calm his blood, try to read, hum something, all in vain. His thoughts inevitably returned to the murder, and he would relive every detail of that day, from the first minute to the last, with terrifying clarity. On the morning of that fateful day, Renardet had woken with a slight dizziness and a pain in his temples. Thinking it was due to the heat, he had stayed in his bedroom until breakfast. Later he had lain down, and towards evening had gone for a walk in his wood, hoping to breathe some fresh air. But scarcely had he left the house when, on the sun-scorched plain, he felt worse. The sun, still high in the sky, poured torrents of scorching light onto the parched, thirsting earth. Not the slightest breeze stirred the leaves. Animals, birds, even grasshoppers, all were still in the silence. Renardet entered the wood and walked on the moss towards the river Brendel, where it was a little cooler under the dense canopy of branches. He felt unwell. It seemed an invisible hand was squeezing his throat, and he walked almost without thinking. Reflection was not his strong suit anyway. Only one thought, persistent, had been tormenting him for the last 3 months, the thought of remarrying. His solitude tormented him, both physically and spiritually. For 10 years he had been accustomed to a woman's presence, to her closeness, to the daily comforts of marriage. Since his wife's death, he felt a vague but imperious need for her constant caress, for her warmth. Having been a widower for 6 months, he was already looking around the district for a suitable bride, a girl or a widow, to marry as soon as the mourning period was over. His soul was pure, but his body, strong as Hercules, was tormented by carnal visions that assailed him in sleep and waking. He drove them away, but they returned. Sometimes, laughing at himself, Renardet would mutter, "I'm like Saint Anthony, tempted by devils." That morning, these obsessive images had assailed him again, and he suddenly felt a desire to plunge into the Brendel to cool his heated blood. He knew a spot further downstream, a wide, deep pool where the locals sometimes bathed in summer. It was there he headed. This bright pool, where the current seemed to slumber, was hidden behind a dense curtain of willows. Drawing nearer, Renardet heard a light, almost imperceptible splashing, unlike the gurgling of the stream. Carefully parting the branches, he looked. In the clear water, a naked girl was frolicking, lightly dancing and gracefully turning. Her skin seemed dazzlingly white. She was no longer a child, but not yet a woman. Plump, with rounded forms, almost mature, yet still youthful, like a precocious adolescent. Renardet stood frozen, seized by anxiety and confusion. His breath caught. A strange, acute feeling tightened his chest. His heart beat wildly, as if one of his sensual dreams had taken flesh, and some evil power had conjured this young, tempting creature before him. A little rustic Venus, born from the river foam, like the one who emerged from the sea waves. Suddenly the girl climbed out of the water and, not seeing him, came straight towards him to get her dress and put it on. She took small, careful steps, afraid of the sharp stones. Renardet, trembling all over, felt himself overwhelmed by an irresistible animal desire that clouded his mind. The girl stopped under the very willow where he was hiding. Losing all control, he pushed the branches apart, rushed at her, and seized her in his arms. Stunned, too frightened to scream or resist, she fell. He took her, not knowing what he was doing, senses as if waking from a nightmare. The girl was sobbing violently. He muttered, "Hush now. Come on, be quiet. I'll give you money." But she wouldn't listen, continuing to weep convulsively. He repeated, losing patience, "Be quiet. Please be quiet." She cried out even louder, desperately trying to break free. Realizing he was lost, Renardet, in a panic, seized her by the throat to stifle that piercing, heart-rending scream. She struggled, defending her life with desperate strength, but he, without realizing it, squeezed her fragile throat in his powerful hands so hard that he strangled her in an instant. He had not meant to kill, only to silence her. Horror-stricken, he sprang to his feet. Before him lay Little Roque, bloodied, her face livid. He nearly took flight, but in his distraught soul, an ancient, inexplicable instinct awoke, the one that guides all creatures in moments of peril. In a sudden impulse, he decided to throw the body into the river, but an inner voice suggested a different course. Renardet gathered the girl's clothes, tied them into a bundle with a piece of string he found in his pocket, and hid them in a deep hole by the bank of the Brendel, under a snag protruding from the water. Then he strode quickly from the scene, emerged onto the meadows, and deliberately took a wide detour so that he would be seen in the distant hamlets. He returned home at his usual time for dinner and told his servants in detail where he had walked. That night, despite everything, he fell into a heavy, almost animal sleep, the kind that condemned men must sometimes sleep. He woke with the first rays of the sun, but did not rise, waiting for his usual hour. He was tormented by an agonizing dread. He knew the crime would soon be discovered. Later, he had to take part in the investigation. He went through it like a somnambulist, as if in a fog. People and objects seemed unreal, as in a drunken delirium, and the reality of what was happening dissolved into the uncertainty that clouds the mind in moments of catastrophe. Only the heart-rending cry of Mother Roque had pierced his heart. He had almost collapsed at her feet, ready to scream, "It was I." But he had restrained himself. Yet that same night, he had retrieved the dead girl's sabots from the water and left them at her mother's door. During the investigation, while Renardet had to steer justice down a false path, he displayed cunning and coolness, maintaining his composure and even smiling. He calmly discussed the magistrate's theories, argued with them, found flaws in their reasoning. He took a strange, morbid pleasure in confusing the investigation, misleading them, and exonerating those under suspicion. But once the case was closed, his nerves gave way, and he became even more irritable than before, though he struggled with all his might to contain his outbursts of anger. He started at every unexpected sound, trembled over trifles. His whole body quivered if a fly landed on his forehead. He was seized by an irresistible need to move. He took endlessly long walks, and sometimes paced his room all night long without going to bed. Renardet was not tormented by pangs of conscience. His coarse nature was insensitive to subtle emotions and moral prohibitions. Energetic, even indomitable, born for battles, for plundering conquered lands and destroying enemies. He was a hunter and a fighter with the instincts of a savage. The life of another meant nothing to him. He respected the church only for political reasons, but believed in neither God nor the devil, and thus expected neither punishment nor reward in the afterlife. His worldview was based on the fragmentary ideas of the 18th century encyclopedists. He considered religion merely a moral justification for the law, invented by men to regulate their social life. Had he killed someone in a duel, in battle, or in a chance quarrel, out of revenge, carelessness, or even for bragging rights, it would have seemed to him an amusing escapade, leaving only a fleeting trace in his soul, like a shot at a hare. But the murder of the child overturned everything inside him. He had committed it in a fit of uncontrollable, frantic passion, in a whirlwind of lust that had clouded his mind. In his heart, in his body, on his lips, even in the fingers that had strangled her, remained a ghastly sensation of that animalistic, panic fear-tainted passion for the girl, taken by surprise and basely murdered. The thought of that terrible scene returned every minute, and however hard Renardet tried to drive away the image of the victim, however much he recoiled from it in horror, he felt that this image was lodged in his head, hovering nearby, waiting only for a moment to reappear. He began to dread the coming of evening, when twilight descends upon the earth. He did not yet understand why the darkness frightened him so, but he sensed a threat in it subconsciously. By day, in the sunlight, his fears receded. Everything around was clear, objects and people were real, they had no need to hide. But at night, in the deaf, impenetrable, endless darkness, which seemed to Renardet as tangible as a wall, lurked something terrifying, an unknown, close, and menacing danger. But what? He soon found out. One evening, unable to sleep, he sat up late in his armchair. Suddenly, it seemed to him that the window curtains stirred. His heart beat anxiously. He froze. The curtains were still, but a moment later they quivered again, or so it seemed to him. Renardet dared not rise, nor even breathe, though he was no coward. He had fought off and would have welcomed burglars in his house. Had the curtains really moved? He asked himself. Could his eyes be deceiving him? It was such a trifle, a slight swaying of the fabric, as if from a breath of wind. Finally, ashamed of his weakness, he jumped up, strode to the window, seized the curtains, and yanked them apart. Before him were only the black, gleaming panes, like blots of ink. Beyond them, stretching to the invisible horizon, was the impenetrable night. He stood before this bottomless darkness and suddenly noticed a moving light in the distance. Pressing his forehead to the glass, he supposed it was a poacher catching crayfish in the Brendel. It was past midnight, and the light flickered in the wood right by the water. To see better, he cupped his hands around his temples like a visor. Suddenly, the light transformed into a radiance, and Renardet saw Little Roque, naked, bloodied, lying on the moss. Seized with horror, he recoiled, knocked against the armchair, and fell flat on his back. He lay in confusion for several minutes, then sat up and tried to reason. It was a hallucination, nothing more, he decided. Some vagrant with a lantern was prowling the bank, that was all. Besides, was it surprising that the memory of the murder sometimes revived the image of the victim before him? He got up, drank a glass of water, sat down again. What shall I do if it happens again? He thought. He was sure that it would happen again. The window beckoned, drawing his gaze. To avoid looking there, he turned his chair around, took a book, tried to read, but soon heard a rustling behind him. Swinging around sharply, he leaned back so far that the chair tilted onto one leg, describing a semicircle. The curtains were swaying. Now there was no doubt. He sprang up, tore them down along with the rod, and pressed against the glass. Nothing. Outside, there was only darkness. Renardet caught his breath, as if saved from certain doom. He moved away, sat down, but immediately felt an irresistible desire to look out the window again. Now, without the curtains, it gaped like a black abyss, beckoning into the expanse of the fields. Suppressing this dangerous temptation, he undressed, put out the light, got into bed, and closed his eyes. Lying motionless on his back, he waited for sleep. Suddenly, despite his closed eyelids, a bright light blinded him. He opened his eyes, thinking the house was on fire, but it was the same darkness all around. Propping himself up on an elbow, he peered at the window. It still drew him. Straining his sight, he made out the stars, then got up, stretched out his hands, crossed the room, fell for the glass, and pressed his forehead against it. In the distance, under the trees, illuminating the darkness with a phosphorescent glow, lay the body of the girl. Renardet cried out, threw himself onto the bed, buried his head under the pillow, and lay like that until morning. From that day on, his life became unbearable. By day he lived in dread of the coming night, and every night the vision returned. Having locked his door, he tried to resist. In vain. Some irresistible force lifted him from his place and drew him to the window, as if summoning the phantom, and it would appear immediately. First, Renardet would see the scene of the crime, the outstretched body with arms and legs flung wide. Then the dead girl would rise and approach with small, slow steps, just as she had that day after her bath. She would cross the lawn, pass the flower bed with its withered blooms, rise into the air, and float towards the window. She moved towards him as she had moved towards the willow where he was hiding on that fatal day. Retreating, Renardet would back away to the bed and fall upon it, knowing the dead girl had entered and was standing behind the curtains, which were about to stir. He would watch them until dawn, expecting the victim to emerge from her hiding place. But she never showed herself, remaining behind the fabric, which sometimes trembled slightly. Clutching the blanket with crooked fingers, Renardet would grip it as he had once gripped Little Roque's throat. He listened to the ticking of the clock, caught the pendulum's beat in the silence, felt the frantic pounding of his own heart, and suffered as, it seemed, no one on earth had ever suffered. Relief came only with the first rays of light, when a pale strip appeared on the ceiling, heralding the morning. Then Renardet was left alone, utterly alone. He would lie down and fall into a heavy, feverish sleep, often haunted by the same nightmare that tormented him while awake. By noon, he would come down for breakfast completely shattered, as if after superhuman exhaustion. He ate little. The fear of the one he was to see that night did not release him even here. He understood clearly that this was no ghost, that the dead do not return. His torment was born in a sick soul, possessed by a single thought, an undying memory. It was this memory that conjured the victim's image, brought it to life, led it to him, and presented it to his eyes, where her indelible likeness was forever imprinted. But he also knew there was no cure, that one cannot hide from one's own memory, and he resolved to die, if only to end this torture. He began to consider how to leave this life. The death had to be simple, natural, so that no one would suspect suicide. He valued his reputation and the name he had inherited from his ancestors. If rumors spread that he had taken his own life, people would remember the unsolved crime, the uncaught murderer, and accuse him, Renardet. A strange idea came to him, to arrange to be crushed by a tree at the very spot where he had strangled Little Roque. He decided to have his wood cut down and stage an accident. But the beech tree had refused to break his spine. In despair, Renardet had returned home, fetched the revolver, but found himself unable to fire it. Dinner time came. He ate and returned to his room. He did not know what to do. Having recoiled from death for the first time, he felt himself a coward. Just moments ago, he had been resolute, firm, ready to end his life without hesitation. But now he was weakened and feared death as much as he feared the girl's ghost. He whispered, I can't. His gaze darted in terror from the table, where the revolver lay, to the window with its drawn curtains. It seemed to him that should his life end, something dreadful would happen. But what? Perhaps they would meet? She was lying in wait for him, waiting, calling to him, to seize him, to take revenge, to destroy him. That was why she appeared every night. He broke down, sobbing like a child, repeating, I can't. Then he collapsed to his knees and began to mumble, my God, even though he still did not believe in God. He no longer dared to look at the window, where he knew the phantom lurked, nor at the table, where the revolver gleamed. Finally, Renardet stood up and said firmly, this cannot go on. It is time to end it. The sound of his own voice in the silent bedroom sent a chill down his spine, but knowing his finger would not pull the trigger again, he could not bring himself to act. Instead, he lay down on the bed, covered his head, and sank into thought. He needed to find a way to deceive himself, to compel himself to die, to devise a trick that would eliminate hesitation, delay, and regret. He envied condemned men being led to execution under guard. If only he could ask someone, shoot me, If only he had a reliable friend to whom he could confess the crime and, trusting his silence, receive death from his hand. But whom could he call upon for such a terrible service? Whom? Renardet ran through his acquaintances in his mind. The doctor? No, he would certainly talk. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He would write to the investigating magistrate, his old friend, and send a denunciation of himself. In the letter, he would lay out everything: how he had committed the atrocity, how he had suffered, how he had longed for death, and how he had devised a way to fortify his weakened will. He would beg Putois, for the sake of their long friendship, to destroy the letter as soon as it was known the guilty party had punished himself. He could rely on this man. He was discreet, true to his word, one of those whose incorruptible conscience was governed solely by reason. Renardet made his decision, and his heart filled with joy. He was instantly calm. He would write the letter at his leisure, drop it in the post-box on his estate wall in the morning, then climb the tower, wait for the postman to come, and as soon as the man in the blue smock had left, he would throw himself headfirst onto the rocks at the tower's base. He would take care to be seen by the workers cutting down the wood. Then he would climb onto the ledge where the flag was raised on holidays, hurl himself against the flagpole, break it with one lunge, and fall with it. Who would suspect it was not an accident? With his weight and the tower's height, he would surely be dashed to pieces. Renardet got up at once, sat down at the table, and began to write. He omitted nothing, not a single detail of the crime, not a single particular of his agonizing life and mental torment. In conclusion, he declared that he had passed sentence on himself, would carry it out himself, and begged his friend to ensure his name remained untarnished. Finishing, he noticed that dawn had broken. He placed the sheets in an envelope, sealed it, wrote the address, ran lightly down the stairs, reached the white post-box at the corner of the estate, and dropped the letter inside, its paper burning his hand. Then he hurried back, bolted the main door, and climbed the tower to wait for the postman to carry away his death warrant. At last he was at peace. He was free. He was saved. The day was frosty. A dry, cold wind stung his face, and Renardet greedily inhaled its icy freshness. The sky blazed with a bright red winter light, and the frost-covered plains sparkled in the first rays of the sun as if strewn with broken glass. Renardet, bareheaded, gazed into the distance. To the left stretched the meadows. To the right, in the village, chimneys were already smoking. The time for the morning meal was near. Below, among the rocks on which he would soon be dashed, flowed the Brendel. The icy dawn restored his strength, filled him with life. The light surrounded him, washed over him, instilled hope. Memories of mornings like this, of brisk walks on the hard, ringing earth, of successful hunts by the ponds where ducks rested, flooded over him. All the joys of life, which he had so loved, came alive in his memory, awakened new desires, stirred powerful impulses in his strong, restless body. And he would die? Why? Kill himself out of fear of a shadow, of something that did not exist? He was rich, not yet old. What madness! He needed distraction, to go away, to travel, and he would forget everything. Had he seen the girl last night, when his mind was occupied with other things? Perhaps he would never see her again. Let her haunt him in this house, but surely not everywhere. The world was vast, and many years lay ahead. Why die? Scanning the meadows, Renardet spotted a blue speck on the path along the Brendel. It was Médéric, the postman, coming from the town to collect the village's mail. Renardet shuddered as if pierced by a sharp pain and rushed headlong down the winding staircase. He would get his letter back, snatch it from the postman. He no longer cared if he was seen. He raced across the frost-covered grass and reached the post box at the corner of the estate just as Médéric arrived. The postman had already opened the little wooden door and was taking out the few letters for the village. Renardet greeted him. "Good morning, Médéric." "Good morning, Monsieur le Maire," the postman replied. "Listen, Médéric," said Renardet. "I posted a letter, but I need it back. Please give it to me." "Very well, Monsieur le Maire, we'll find it," the other man answered. Raising his eyes, Médéric froze. Renardet was unrecognizable. His cheeks were livid, his clouded, sunken eyes were shadowed by dark circles. His hair was disheveled, his beard unkempt, his cravat askew. It was clear he had not slept all night. The postman asked with curiosity, "Are you unwell, Monsieur le Maire?" Renardet suddenly realized he looked strange, grew embarrassed, and muttered, "No, it's nothing. I just jumped out of bed to get the letter. I was asleep, you see." Médéric, a former soldier, felt a vague suspicion. "Which letter?" he specified. "The one you're going to give back to me," replied Renardet. Médéric hesitated. The mayor's behavior seemed unnatural. What if the letter contained a secret, perhaps even a political one? He knew Renardet was no Republican and had heard of the tricks employed during elections. "Who is the letter for?" he asked. "For the investigating magistrate, Monsieur Putois. You know him. He's a friend of mine," answered Renardet. Médéric rummaged in his bag and found the envelope in question. He turned it over in his hands, looking at the address with confusion and anxiety. He was afraid both of failing in his duty and of making an enemy of the mayor. Renardet noticed his hesitation and made a sudden lunge to snatch the letter. This impulsive gesture convinced Médéric that the matter concerned an important secret. Resolving to do his duty, he put the envelope back into his bag, fastened it, and said firmly, "No, Monsieur le Maire, I cannot. If the letter is for the court, I have no right to return it." Renardet's heart constricted with unbearable horror. He stammered, "Please, Médéric." But the postman had already turned and was walking away, carrying with him the letter that bore Renardet's death sentence. "You know me, Médéric. You recognize my handwriting. I tell you again, I need that letter," insisted Renardet. "I cannot," the postman replied firmly. "Listen, Médéric, I am not deceiving you. I'm telling you, give me back the letter. I must have it." "No, I cannot," he repeated. Renardet, hot-tempered by nature, boiled over with rage. "Damn it all, watch your step. Don't forget who you're talking to. Don't trifle with me. I'll have you out of a job in an instant. I am the mayor here, and I order you. Give me the letter." Médéric said curtly, "I cannot, Monsieur le Maire." Beside himself with anger, Renardet seized him by the shoulders, trying to wrench the bag away. But the postman nimbly sidestepped, retreated, and raised his Hollywood cudgel. Remaining calm, he warned, "Do not touch me, Monsieur le Maire, or I will strike. Be careful. I'm only doing my duty." Renardet understood it was all over. He checked himself, grew quiet, and, like a child, began to whimper. "Come now, my friend, give me the letter. I will reward you. 100 francs. Do you hear? 100. The postman turned and walked on. Renardet, gasping for breath, trudged after him, repeating, "Médéric, Médéric, listen. I'll give you 1,000 francs. Do you understand? 1,000. The other walked on in silence. Renardet persisted. "You will be rich. Name your price." 50,000. 50,000 for the letter. What does it cost you? You don't want to? Fine, 100,000. Do you hear? 100,000. Médéric stopped and turned around. His face was inscrutable, his gaze severe. Enough. One more word, and I will report everything you have just said to the authorities. Renardet froze as if nailed to the spot. It was all over. There was no hope. He turned around and, like a hunted animal, rushed back towards the house. Médéric stopped, looking after the fleeing mayor in astonishment. He watched him disappear into the house and decided to wait, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. And indeed, soon the tall figure of Renardet appeared on the tower of the house. He paced the platform like a madman, seized the flagpole, and shook it violently, trying in vain to break it. Suddenly, like a diver, he threw his hands forward and plunged headfirst into the void. Médéric rushed to help. In the garden, he ran into the woodcutters coming to work and shouted to them as he ran that there had been an accident. At the foot of the tower, they found a bloody body with its head shattered on the rocks. Nearby flowed the broad Brendel, and across its transparent surface stretched a long, pink streak, blood mixed with brains. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I will be delighted to chat with you.